Welcome to BioBytes. Today we have Sandy Milligan with us. I think we have an exceptional guest who's joining us, and I think a really exciting episode to inspire and enlighten. Today's guest, as mentioned, is Sandra Milligan, a dynamic and accomplished C-suite executive in the pharma industry, over 20 years of experience spanning across large companies like Amgen, Genentech, and Merck. I believe has cemented her place as a trailblazer in the biopharma sector. Expertise ranging right across therapeutic areas and modalities, including oncology, small molecules, biologics, diagnostics, and vaccines. And Sandy is an exceptional leader who drives innovation and was recognized in 2023, where she was named as the top women in leader in the biopharma industry by Endpoint News. Currently serving on the board at Gossamer Bio. Currently the president at Aspire Women's Health. Sandy is building on her extensive experience, including her pivotal role as the founding head of R&D at Organon. Commitment to advancing pipeline growth, portfolio value creation is evident across her leadership, and really excited to dive into this one. So Sandy, if you could kindly walk us through some of your background and key critical career moves you've made to date that have led to your success, that would be fantastic.
Shakir, thank you so much for having me today. I really appreciate the opportunity to just share my experiences over the years, over the decades, which is a little bit just unexpected that I'd be here, but I'm really thrilled to share it with everybody. So, when I started out my career in college, I wanted to be an EMT ambulance driver. And funny enough, it was just in an era in college where women were just starting to get into medicine and a little bit more in higher numbers, if you will. And so it just wasn't something that was really thought about all the time. And as I progressed in college, I decided I wanted to be a physician, which was fantastic. I had some peers and mentors that really helped me along the way, and went off to medical school. Ended up accepting a military scholarship, and that's how I have my military service, which was a fantastic experience during Desert Storm, Desert Hope over 20 years ago. So served with just incredible leaders, incredible people, supporting our veterans as well as our active duty soldiers during those engagements. Went on to law school, and that was sort of a pivot. I would say, focusing my attention on your question specifically, my career feels like a series of pivots. And so pivoting from medicine, pivoting to law. I practiced law for about 6, 7 years in private practice with a large firm focused on M&A, venture capital, and licensing, and then had an opportunity to join Amgen in its law department of all places, and started there and just loved it. Loved being part of the biopharma family, and just the depth and level of experience inside of an organization that is filled with whether it's technical experts, operational experts, great leaders, was really inspiring to me. After about 3 years, pivoted again, went over to regulatory affairs, and just had a fabulous experience with some of the leaders and mentors at Amgen at the time, taking on larger and larger roles, sometimes more focused, sometimes more broad. And then after Amgen, it just sort of accelerated, right? Pivoted again over to Genentech, pivoted to Merck to be part of the Keytruda wave, if you will, and then pivoted to Organon when Organon spun out from Merck. So it's been an interesting journey, and most recently pivoting from pharma to diagnostics, which is the focus of Aspire Women's Health.
That's incredible. And, I think as part of your journey throughout big pharma and now biotech, I mean, as you see biotechs being built out from the ground up, what are the most successful characteristics and attributes, that you find or that you recognize that you tend to look out for?
It's a great question. And I think constructing Organon and spinning it out, there were certainly lessons that I wouldn't have learned previously, not being part of a startup, that I learned along the way. And in choosing talent, what I learned in hindsight was there are leaders who love to build, and there are leaders who love to lead, and they're not always the same person. And so what I found is there are leaders who just really, they love the organizational design, the structure, building out the team. And once that team's up and running, they get distracted. They get a little bored. Huh, nothing really to do. And then there's other leaders who come in with a blank canvas, and they're so used to leading an established organization, the blank canvas becomes overwhelming, and they don't know where to start. Well, how am I going to organize? What are the axes I'm going to pivot on? Is it geographical? Is it by therapeutic function? Is it by indication? And so it was interesting, I think, in choosing leaders, and I think sometimes the hardest part is making sure that you have a leader who can change their management style, their leadership style, and keep their interest depending on what life cycle phase the company's in. And it has been an interesting conversation after I left Organon with some of my mentors and peers talking about biotech. Well, gosh, Sandy, you spent your entire career in big pharma, resource flush, lots of people. How are you going to make that transition? And I will say it is a very interesting transition. It's going from wearing a singular hat, if you will, as a leader with a large function, to wearing multiple hats in the day. And in any given day, there'll be gaps in capabilities or capacity, and you need to roll up your sleeves and pitch in. It's been pretty exciting.
It's interesting you say that. I think when we talk about leadership, especially at the C-suite level for biotech companies, I think, you know, when they're looking to bring on, let's say, a CEO or a specific type of C-suite member, I think it almost depends on, like you said, the product life cycle and what the key near-term milestones are, and whether that's pulling out a seasoned CEO from a larger brand to come and, create new infrastructure for a growing mid-sized company, or actually whether it's a very early stage company that needs a CEO that can articulate the storyline and work with investors and really continue to help that company get to the next milestone. And again, like I said, I think leadership, I wish there was, somewhat a simple chemistry and science that you look out for, but I think there's so many different bits of DNA and variables that make it up. It's often bespoke, and I think that's where the challenge is with hiring the right people. As you mentioned, when you're growing out a spin out, how are you bringing in people that think both near term and long term for the business overall strategical direction? So no, that's really interesting. And Sandy, over the years, no doubt you've worked with some amazing people and mentors. I mean, could you share the best advice that you've received throughout your career?
Absolutely. When I was back at Amgen and I shifted from law to regulatory, I took a new role, and it was head of the product labeling, right? Very discrete, operational, tactical role. And my manager at the time was Sean Harper, and he was going on his odyssey, learning about the business more deeply at Amgen before becoming the head of R&D. Just a fabulous mentor and manager. And the very first day when I moved over to regulatory and he was in charge of global regulatory affairs, he pulled me aside and he said, "Well, I'm so glad you're here. Now I need you to find a successor." And it was a bit of a shock. I thought I had done something wrong the very first day, stepped on somebody's toes. And I think he saw the disbelief in my face, and he said, "No, no, no. If you don't have a great successor, you'll never move. You'll always be the head of product labeling. Now, that may be exactly where you want to be, but if it's not where you want to be and you don't have a great successor behind you, I'm not going to move you. You'll never take a broader role. You'll never take a higher role." And I took that advice to heart, even though it was so contrary to my professional experience in being a physician or being a lawyer. There wasn't really succession planning. And you have to take a leap of faith. And that's when I learned pretty quickly that you need to hire people who are better than you so they can be your successor. So you can take on that next role when that opportunity comes up. So I would say that was probably some of the most pivotal advice I've ever received.
That's amazing. I think it's that constant idea of how do you make yourself redundant, and not in a negative
Exactly.
way, but in a way that how are you building the ship to run without you so that you can strategically add value to other areas, whether it's a
That's right.
broader role or whether it's to tap into new streams of income. And that's interesting advice to hear pretty early on as you step into the industry, right? And already having that level of mindset of, what's really good leadership. And hiring amazing people is something that we all strive for, and I think in every job, right, in every industry. And it's the trick. I mean, you meet amazing people, and they'll often say, well, it was the team that I had, and it was the folks that we brought together, and we created a level of synergy and chemistry and a culture. And that's what allowed the business or the group or the team or the project or the program to really scale and grow. Fantastic. I like that. I like that, Sandy. And then, over the years in the big pharma companies, and, during your time with Merck, I mean, you were overseeing hundreds and hundreds of people globally in that regulatory department, and a real seat on the table. I know Merck was in a position where they saw tons of value from a regulatory standpoint to where the business wanted to be. How did you find fostering culture of innovation and collaboration within that group and across the years?
It was amazing. And of course, we had an amazing rocket ship in Keytruda. And the data that was coming through with Keytruda really was our ticket to entry to pushing discussions with regulatory agencies that hadn't previously quite been pushed, and really helped the thinking around how do you accelerate access to an innovative product to more people with an egregious and life-threatening disease in a short amount of time. So I think it was amazing to have that rallying banner, if you will, globally, because it really was an intent to bring that molecule across the globe and affect the lives of so many people that we could. I think one of the most interesting conversations I had at the time with Roger Perlmutter, the head of R&D at Merck, was the fact that, and it was obvious from the outside too, that not all, but a lot of the R&D resources were being moved and focused on oncology. When I first joined Keytruda, the oncology department at Merck was tiny, very tiny, and they needed to grow rapidly. And because it was basically a platform drug that could affect many indications and help people with many different types of cancer, building the infrastructure quickly was extremely important. And you could see the shift in resources out of things like women's health or cardiovascular or respiratory or immunology. And having a conversation with Roger one time, what are we doing? We're so focused on Keytruda. And I loved his answer. He said, Sandy, we only have till 2028 when the patent expires to get all the data that we can, to invest as much as we can in the program to develop this product. And even before that, nobody's going to invest several $100 million in a clinical trial in 2026, only to have a readout in 2028. And certainly in 2028, when the biosimilars come, nobody's going to invest in new indications. So it is our obligation to investigate and run clinical trials in as many tumor types and lines of therapies and combinations of therapies that we can until that patent expiry. And I had never thought about it that way, in the sense that it really wasn't a race against the commercialization. It was a race against time to bring enough data forward so that the most patients could benefit from the product. And so that was really game changing for me. And certainly I shared that story over and over. And it resonated with everybody in regulatory and safety, that we were running a race for patients. And it really was a race to 2028. And what could we do with a single molecule and a single platform to affect as many lives as we could?
And when we talk about innovation, Sandy, and you're somebody that's been a senior member in some of the top pharma companies on this planet. I mean, do you think that there's a difference between how you would drive innovation and the amount of innovation that might occur within a huge big pharma brand compared to a growing biotech? And if so, what are some of those differences in innovation?
And I think some of it is resources. The large pharma companies have enormous resources, enormous investment opportunities. They have a lot of shots on goal. When I think about research and development at Merck, it felt, parts of the organization felt very academic as compared to, business driven. There was sort of a nestled area, same with Genentech, right? A lot of resources in the discovery department. And although everybody knew that they were trying to discover molecules that could be eventually commercialized, they were insulated a bit in the sense of explore the science that drives your interest and your curiosity. And so I think that the big difference for me is resources. And big pharma has resources where you can make mistakes, or you can have products fail, you can have molecules fail. Discovery science fails often and frequently, as we know. And on the biotech side, it's all the eggs are in the basket. And I think that it really raises the stakes, obviously, for the smaller biotech companies, for the investors, for the executives, for the players. And I think there's sort of a longevity, a long view, if you will, in big pharma. And
Mm,
you see a stability of people who stay. And I think in biopharma, or biotech, you don't see that quite as often. And I think you have to have almost two kinds of people who can tolerate change and change and change and change, which I think really is characteristic for the biotech industry. Because if something fails or doesn't bring you the expectations that the company was hoping for, you have to pivot so fast to
mm.
something new in order to survive. And so I think it just takes a different sort of executive to lead, as well as the employees that stay.
Yeah, it's a really interesting way of putting it. And I think even within big pharma, and you may agree, but I think at times nothing's ever really safe because programs are coming up and down at any given time. So somewhat you still pivot within larger companies, but maybe it's a different type of characteristic in the sense of you're not having to shift the entire company and complete focus point, but you might just move into a different indication or different program. And
Right.
I think it's a lot easier, more fluid to make that transition within the big farmers and in the biotech world. It can often be a lot more cutthroat. And we've seen a lot of that over the last 24 months where organizations have really struggled. And if you're in a larger brand, you can almost pivot into something slightly different or, reinvest your resources. But biotechs have really struggled, right? And I think very clear cut differences from that perspective. And as we build on that, Sandy, could you share some major setbacks that you faced throughout your years in leadership within the pharma world?
So I can definitely share, I wouldn't call them setbacks, but maybe challenges to where I thought I was going and where I
Hmm.
ended up. And, and one of the examples was back in Amgen. And I was at the time leading a really large operational organization, having a great time, sitting on the senior leadership table. And Amgen had just received a complete response letter to denosumab, which was a really important product. It was for osteoporosis, and it pivoted them out of oncology support and was really going to support the top line. And the complete response, of course, was challenging, and we needed to get more data and bring it forward and basically reassess how we were going to approach the agency. And we were also moving Xgeva forward at the same time, which was the indication for bone metastases. And I was asked to pivot out of my role of the broader organization to take a narrow role and in this area to manage the products from a regulatory perspective. So I went from over 100 reports at the time to three. And it also meant stepping off the leadership team. And it wasn't viewed as moving up, it was a lateral. And perhaps, even though it was a really important project, not really incremental in my career. But the company asked me to do it, and I did it. And I really enjoyed it. It gave me that depth of the therapeutic area that I needed. And I would argue if I hadn't made that move, I probably wouldn't have had the opportunities that I had after that in regulatory. And so I think sometimes a company asks you to do something and it may not feel quite right at the time, but always ensuring that you give it your all, you give it your best because you're a team player. And in the end, I think it opened up doors that were unexpected to me for the rest of my career.
That's incredible. And being, I think, somebody who's a true, what I would say, is a true leader in regulatory affairs, and has a load of real gravitas in this realm. What would you say biotech executives could take away from being able to run the most successful regulatory outlook and operation for their programs and for their biotechs, whether they're 100 people or whether they're 5,000 people plus, right? What are some of the most successful regulatory aspects for an organization to be able to be successful?
I think it's really important that regulatory has a seat at the strategic table. And I know that there are many different ways that companies organize the functions inside of R&D. I think one of the most successful ways to organize is to make sure that the regulatory leader is sitting side by side the clinical development leader. The reason why I say that is that I think that the regulatory leads, they need to have the same data representation and information from the clinical side at the same time that clinical does, because it constantly changes the regulatory strategy. And it's a bit of a chicken and the egg. You need to have great data to have a really clean regulatory strategy. Don't always have great data. Sometimes you have great data in one area, maybe it's a little fuzzy in other areas, and the regulatory strategy becomes more challenging. And the regulatory strategy is so important, whether it's sequencing, which countries you're going to first, whether it is the strategic discussion, because regulatory agencies can have different opinions about the level of data that they want to see, or for instance, the endpoints that they want to see. And it's important to have that regulatory piece front and center. So, not that you ever expect clinical development to develop data just to satisfy regulatory agencies, but there has to be just a combined effort to see where that strategy is. So I think that that is where I've seen companies be more successful. Instead of, I think, leaders that maybe don't have as much experience in the biotech or pharma industry that come in, they think regulatory is about quality compliance. And certainly, quality compliance is one aspect of a regulatory organization, but understanding that regulatory brings so much strategy to the table to navigate the pathways is really important, because it in the end, it just doesn't matter if you have great data if you can't get registered. It just doesn't matter.
Mhm.
So I think it's recognizing, and in most companies you see this, you see, there's a lot of people with a seat at the table, whether it's the payer group and coverage, obviously commercial and marketing, regulatory, clinical, preclinical, or early. It's really important to have that integrated team.
Excellent. Well, Sandy, I just want to say thank you so much for coming on here today. Tons of gems and I think focus points for all the leaders that listen in. Thank you so much, and looking forward to seeing your journey as you continue to grow.
Thank you so much for having me this morning. It's been great.
Thank you.